Hello, my name is David Johnson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dakota. Dakota is a software company that specializes in customer experience solutions. And our claim to fame is that we identify the what and why behind customer behaviors. And we do that by analyzing unstructured data or feedback that comes into your organization from your customers and revealing their emotions, their state of mind, the topics that they're discussing, and a wide array of what we call cognitive states. We use all that information to establish a very rich understanding of what your customers are saying, the context of the conversations, and identifying very specifically what's moving the needle for your customers and why. This becomes very actionable for executives like yourself. As we've had conversations with executives over the last several months, it's become quite clear that there are a lot of questions regarding technology. And we've heard very often that executives are really like to understand why they're seeing the things that they're seeing in the meetings that they go to and information that's being presented to them, because while investments have been made, it doesn't seem like they're getting information that's vastly different from what they've had in the past. And so what we did is we put together something called an executive briefing series, and this series is intended to educate executives to some degree so that they can understand why they're seeing some of the things that they're seeing every day from their teams. And so we're going to focus on surveys in this particular video and how they can work for you and perhaps against you. And so the first question I have is a rhetorical question, which is, would you take your company's survey that you provide to your customers? And so the point here, like I said earlier, is not used properly. Surveys can actually diminish the customer experience. And while there's a tremendous amount of noise and there's a lot of talk advancement in the industry, it's hard to believe that we're still using survey techniques from the 1950s. And while yes, the Net Promoter Score and other CSAT measures like 5-star ratings and so on have limitations, long, intrusive, and irrelevant surveys are not the answer. What we need are contemporary surveys or conversational relationships with customers where we can have a continuous understanding of our relationship with them and we can get actionable insights. And we need to focus on all of our customers, not just a sample of our customers. And within organizations, this is a bit challenging because patterns and habits are difficult to break, right? So for your organization and your agencies, we really need to inspire them to think differently about capturing information from customers. We really need to get them to focus on all customers, not just small subsets of customers. And we need to make sure that this data becomes actionable going forward. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through a very specific experience that I had yesterday where I took a survey for a product I purchased from a large retailer. It's a top 50 retailer, but the point here is that 2 years ago they were a top 20 retailer. I completed this survey yesterday morning. I redacted the information to protect the innocent, but this survey was produced by a top research firm in the industry, and it was implemented by one of the largest companies in our industry for customer experience. And so this is not an uncommon example in the industry today. So I'm going to walk through a variety of screens, primarily pointing out what the purpose of the screen was without getting into details, and I can share this with you in far greater detail if you're interested. So the first one is about pre-survey prep. They're telling us a little bit about the survey and what our expectations should be. The second screen is again more pre-survey prep. The third screen is more pre-survey prep, more pre-survey prep, more pre-survey prep, and finally on screen 6 we get into the survey. And now they're asking us a little bit about the current visit and what was our purpose. Next, they're asking a little bit about past performance. Have you purchased here before and how have we performed? Now they're asking for a competitive comparison. How do we stack up against other competitors in this retail space? Next, it's more about satisfaction. How satisfied are you? Now we're getting into how easy are we to do business with? And this is where we start to look at something that we like, which is an open-ended question. So here they're asking for more information to learn more about your experience so that they can continuously improve. And we like this. What I don't like about it, though, is the way that if they ask the question, it's going to yield a list of items, not necessarily a great context of what the customer wanted to communicate to us. Secondly, that list will generate good word clouds, but as we know, those aren't actionable. But what bothers me most about this is where we are in the survey and we're taking this. Here we're a little past a third of the way through the survey and I have to fill this in. And in order for me to submit this survey, I have to complete the rest of the survey. So while I may have told you everything that I wanted to tell you here, I'm still forced to go through the rest of the survey. The probability of this being essentially redundant or irrelevant is very high from this point forward. So next, a little bit about purchase intent and recommendation. Would you recommend us to other people? Next, more about the purpose of this particular visit. Next, we get into tell us about the products that you purchased. Believe it or not, there are 27 options on this list, and the product that I purchased was not on this list. A little bit frustrating as I had to read through all 27 options to identify that it didn't exist. Next, a little bit about the assistance that I received in the store. Next, about product availability. Now we're back to assistance in the store. More about assistance in the store. A little bit about the checkout process. And now we're into segmentation. The next several screens are related to segmentation. So segmentation again, more on segmentation, and then finally we get into the completion of the survey and me providing information so they can communicate back to me. The statistics are 25 screens, 72 items to be filled in. After completing the open-end the way that I completed it, it took about 20 minutes to respond versus the 10-minute expectation that they set. And the reality is that this type of survey is going to generate very low response rates. What I do like about this survey, however, is this open-ended question. Our approach is more focused on this, and I'll get to that in a moment. So here are some of the challenges with these types of surveys. And this is not a one-off. This is how the vast majority of surveys look in the industry. And that's why with mobile survey responses, the claims that we get are typically between 1 and 15%, but here we're looking at between 1 and 3%. In-app surveys, roughly 13%. Telephone surveys, we're at about 9%. Millennials across the board are a fraction of all these numbers. And it's going lower. And the reason it's going lower is because these are not great experiences, right? The root cause is that this is not a contemporary approach for capturing information from customers. It lacks relevance, it's too long, it's not engaging, it's confusing, and it can be frustrating. And the problem that we have is that we can use these types of ways to capture information from customers, and we can turn good experiences into bad experiences. We can turn bad experiences into worse experiences. Then the perception is that we end up being out of touch, or we diminish the brand because of this poor perception, and we're perceived as not listening and not hearing what our customers are saying. And so at Dakota, we beat CX with a simple stick. We really have simplified this entire approach. And what we've done is we've created a simple process where we capture information from one or two or maybe a couple more questions. It goes into our cognitive insights machine. We prepare and interpret that data for you. We tell you what are the things that move the needle and why, so you can act with confidence. But let's drill into a little bit about the questions that we ask. So here's just two questions. Here we're going to ask a Net Promoter Score question. How likely are you to recommend this retailer to others for products and or services you use? Scale 0 to 10. This is the traditional Net Promoter Score question. And then we follow that up, or we append it with what we call an imaginative question. And an imaginative question for us is something like this. Tell us about your most recent experience, and tell us as if you were telling a good friend. Try to capture all the important aspects of your experience, both good and bad, and describe if and why you would or would not recommend this retailer. What we find is that we get dramatically more information from customers because this is relevant, it's engaging. This is how people want to communicate. It's conversational. And so here are some metrics behind that based upon a study that we produced, and we can share this with you as well. But when we compare our imaginative question to traditional survey questions or traditional open-ended survey questions, these are the results that we see. Far greater positive and negative emotion, greater sentiment, far greater cognitive state detection, and then far greater attribution. All of this helps us capture a much better understanding of what the customer is saying so we can make the recommendations and provide insights that end up being actionable. So the key to the impact analysis, or the key to the why for us, is this thing called an impact analysis. And there's a problem in the big data industry, and one of the clients that we've talked to in the past said it pretty well. This is a very large company. They said, it appears that the more data we get, the dumber we are. And what that person meant was that they get lost in the volumes of information. It's very difficult to distinguish between what people talk about a lot versus what they really care about. And let me give you an example. That open-ended question, the way that it was asked in that particular example, will yield words, and perhaps you'll get some basic topics. And here what you have is you have a complaints analysis. And I've de-identified the data, and so these would typically have names associated with the topics, but I'm going to call them A through J to protect the innocent. And what you would see here is you would see, well, based on what our customers are saying, they're talking about A, B, C, and D disproportionately greater than E through J, so we better go focus on A, B, C, and D. Well, that's not necessarily true, because as I just said, just because they're talking about this a lot doesn't necessarily mean it's important. So what we've done is we've created this approach called the impact analysis, an AI-based approach, where we look at topics and then we assign weights associated with emotions or the persona changes that we see for a particular customer. Or we look at experience performance, which is were the customer's needs met or unmet in the communication that we were reading. Do they trust the company or not trust the company? Was the product worth the money or not worth the money? And then we have a wide array of purchase path classifiers that allow us to identify where that customer is in the purchase process. All that information gets assigned to topics, and we produce essentially a 2x2 analysis. And we look at the data across two dimensions. What are the things that impact behavior versus what are the things that people talk about a lot? And so we have low impact conversations, and then we have high impact conversations. And then we have low frequency conversations and high frequency conversations. And if we place the topics on this grid, if you will, after they've gone through this analysis, what you would see is that D and B are not only discussed most often, they're also discussed with high degrees of impact, right? So these are high impact, high frequency topics. After focusing on these, we would then focus on G, E, and F, because while they're talked about less frequently, they have a significantly greater impact on behavior. And we may not even decide to choose to focus on A and C, because while people talk about them a lot, they don't influence customer behavior. This is challenging, right? This creates challenges for organizations in that they make investments in these four and they don't understand why they're not seeing changes. And it really complicates the analysis of all the investments that are being made. The way that we produce this analysis, we give you a descending list based on the impact analysis of things to go focus on. So what this means to executives is that our basically imaginative question approach, our single question appended to NPS or other CSAT scale metrics, is essentially the equivalent of 10 to 75 traditional survey questions. And we allow you then to understand the true unfiltered voice of the customer, understand what's moving the needle and why, correlate these investments to business performance, allow your organization to provide you the answers to the most difficult questions that you have. And this is probably most important. We're providing a level of empirical evidence that you can present to your organization to get them to lean in to the concept of being customer focused, because we've essentially quantified the impact of the experience that the customers are having. And then most importantly, you can make decisions based on this empirical evidence with high degrees of confidence. So our recommendations for organizations like yours is have your team show you the surveys that your customers are receiving. Ask yourself, how would you feel about completing this survey? Ask your team what percentage of customers are actually completing these surveys today, and does it really have a correlation to the overall customer base that you're focused on? Ask your team to show you new findings that have been derived from these traditional techniques, and then challenge them to look at new and more imaginative ways to focus on addressing customer feedback so that you can make this data more actionable for organizations like yours. So just to close here, if you're not comfortable with the insights that you're receiving, please give us a call. We'd be happy to meet with you and talk about how we might be able to help you and improve the insights that you're getting. Or, fundamentally, if you just want to have a conversation and chat about technology in general, please pick up the phone and call me directly. I'll be happy to help you out. Thank you, have a great day, and we look forward to working with you soon.